let's jump right into one of history's most foundational stories of faith, doubt, and a promise that seemed, well, completely impossible. We're talking about the story of Abraham and Sarah. And this whole story really boils down to one central question, one that I think we all face in some way. What do you do when you're promised something amazing, but every single piece of evidence in your life says there's no way it can happen? Let's dive in. So, to set the scene, we've got this couple, Abram and Sarai. They've been given this incredible promise from God that they're going to be the ancestors of a huge nation. But there's one giant, glaring problem. They don't have any kids. And they're not getting any younger. And you've got to understand, the amount of time we're talking about here is just staggering. We're not talking about waiting a few months or even a couple of years. By the time Abram is 85, they've already been waiting in Canaan for a full decade. For them, this must have felt less like a delay and more like a definite dead end. So what do you do when you're that desperate? Well, Sarai decides to take matters into her own hands. She comes up with a plan that was actually pretty common back then. She gives her Egyptian maidservant, Hagar, to her husband. The idea was that any child Hagar had with Abram would legally belong to Sarai. It was a very human attempt to help God out. But as you can probably guess, trying to force a divine promise with a human plan, well, it leads to some serious problems. This one decision creates a ton of conflict and jealousy, and things get messy really, really fast. The plan works, at least on a biological level. Hagar gets pregnant. But then she starts looking down on Sarai, and Sarai gets harsh with her in return. It gets so bad that Hagar just runs away, out into the desert all alone. And it's out there in her lowest moment that she has this incredible encounter with an angel. The angel gives her a promise for her own son and tells her to go back. And in that moment, feeling seen in her despair, Hagar gives God a new name, the God who sees me. The angel tells her to name her son Ishmael, which means God hears, because God heard her cries of misery. The prophecy for Ishmael, though, is pretty tough. He's described as a wild donkey of a man who would live in conflict with his relatives. Abram is 86 years old when his first son is born. And this is the absolute key to understanding what's going on. You have these two sons, but they have two totally different origins. Ishmael is the son born from the flesh, from human planning and effort. But he's not the one God promised. The promised son, Isaac, would be born according to the promise. A straight-up miracle, a result of God's plan and God's plan alone. Okay, so fast forward 13 years. 13! Abram is now 99 years old. The promise of another son feels like a distant, faded memory. And it's right at this moment that God shows up again, not just to repeat the promise, but to make it official, to turn it into a binding contract. When God appears this time, he calls himself something new, El Shaddai, which means God Almighty. And that's not just a fancy title, it's a huge statement. He's basically saying, forget what you know about biology, forget the laws of nature, I'm the one in charge here. He's setting the stage for something that makes no human sense. And to really drive this point home, God gives them new names. This is like a total identity reset. Abram, which means exalted father, becomes Abraham, father of many nations. And Sarai, which means my princess, a very personal title, becomes Sarah, mother of nations. Their new names are literally the promise, spoken out loud before it ever came true. So what was in this contract, this covenant? Well, it was huge. God promises that Abraham will have countless descendants, that they'll possess the land of Canaan forever, and most importantly, that he would be their God. And there was a physical sign of this deal, circumcision. It was meant to be like a permanent marriage vow, a mark showing they belonged to God. So the contract is signed, but now God is about to drop an absolute bombshell. No more vague someday promises. He's about to give them a very specific deadline. And their reaction is one of the most real, most human moments in the entire story. So picture this. Abraham is just hanging out by his tent in the heat of the day, and three strangers walk up. He immediately shows them amazing hospitality, which was a huge deal back then. And after they eat, one of the visitors, who turns out to be the Lord, makes the most unbelievable announcement. I'll be back this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Let's just let that number sink in for a second. 90. Sarah is 90 years old. The text is very clear that she is way, way past the age of childbearing. This isn't just unlikely. Biologically speaking, it's impossible. So what does Sarah do? Well, she's inside the tent. She overhears this whole conversation, and she just laughs. And it's not a happy, joyful laugh. It's that laugh of pure disbelief. The kind you let out when you hear something so ridiculous you can't even process it. She's literally thinking to herself, seriously, after all this time, now I'm going to have a child? And God's response to her silent, skeptical laugh is the absolute heart of the whole story. He doesn't yell at her. He doesn't shame her. He just asks the one question that cuts through every human doubt and limitation. Is anything too hard for the Lord? And that question changes everything. But just as we're zoomed in on this incredibly personal family moment, the camera suddenly pulls way back. The focus shifts from Abraham's own future to the fate of entire cities, and Abraham is about to step into a brand new role. God lets Abraham in on his plan to judge the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, what's so fascinating here is that God brings Abraham into the loop, treating him like a trusted friend. And in doing so, God invites Abraham to become an intercessor, to be an advocate for anyone righteous who might be in the city. And Abraham absolutely steps up. He starts this incredible back and forth, asking, will you really sweep away the righteous with the wicked? He starts by asking if God will spare the city for 50 good people. God says yes. So Abraham keeps going, humbly but boldly, down to 45, then 40, 30, 20, and finally, he makes one last trembling plea. What if they're just 10? And God agrees. For the sake of just 10 righteous people, the entire city would be saved. This isn't really a business negotiation. It's this profound look at divine justice and mercy, with Abraham passionately pleading for any life that could be saved. Well, as it turns out, they couldn't even find 10 righteous people, and the city was destroyed. But, and this is so important, Abraham's prayer was not for nothing. It had a real effect. Because of Abraham's intercession, his nephew Lot and his 2 daughters were pulled out of the city before the disaster. His plea mattered. And that kind of leaves us with this final, lingering thought. Think about it. Sarah and Abraham took action with Hagar, and it created a mess. Then they were asked to just have faith in a promise that seemed impossible. But then Abraham took action again, pleading with God for others. It's a tension we all live with. So the question is, where is that line between taking action yourself and just having the faith to wait for a solution that's bigger than you?